His hand didn't shake. That was the thing. Dominic Calloway stood in the doorway of a penthouse that occupied the entire 62nd floor of a building he owned, holding an envelope that weighed almost nothing, and his hand was perfectly still. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The postmark read 3 years ago, and the handwriting on the front, his full name, written in slanted blue ink, belonged to a woman he had once loved so completely that losing her had nearly hollowed him out. The seal was unbroken. He had never opened this letter because he had never seen it. Not once. Not until 15 minutes ago, when he found it pressed flat beneath the false bottom of a jewelry drawer that wasn't his. Across the living room, a sprawling space of Italian marble and low-lit glass that cost more than most people's lifetimes. A woman in ivory silk loungewear held a glass of white wine. She watched him the way someone watches weather rolling in from a distance, with calm, practiced detachment. She did not flinch. She did not set the glass down. He asked one question, just one. "Did you intercept this?" She didn't deny it. She brought the rim of the glass to her lips, took a slow sip, and then she said the 5 words that detonated 3 years of lies. "I protected you from her." Now, if you're sitting there wondering what could possibly be inside a single envelope that would make a man worth $11 billion look like the ground had just opened beneath his feet, let me tell you, that letter told him he had a daughter, a little girl, 3 years old by now. And the woman who wrote it, the woman he had never stopped thinking about, not really, not even when he told himself he had, she had poured her entire heart onto that page. She told him she was pregnant. She told him she was scared. She told him she wasn't asking for his money, only for him to know, to choose. And when weeks passed, and then months passed, and he never responded, she made peace with what she believed was his answer. She believed he read that letter and chose silence, chose distance, chose to let her and their daughter disappear. She was wrong. He never got the chance to choose at all, because the woman standing across from him, his fiancée, the woman the tabloids called his perfect match, the woman whose family merger had doubled his portfolio, had taken that letter out of the mail, read every word of it, and buried it where he would never look. 3 years. A child he didn't know existed. A woman he thought had simply walked away. And a lie held together by nothing more than a hidden envelope and a sip of wine. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Whether you're brand new here or you've been with me for a while, I am so glad you're listening. Drop where you're tuning in from right now. I love seeing how far this community stretches, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming, because this story, it doesn't slow down from here. Now, before we go any further, before we talk about who Dominic was before this moment, who wrote that letter and why she stopped waiting for an answer, and what the fiancé thought she was actually protecting, we need to rewind. Because to understand how a single envelope destroyed a billionaire's future and rebuilt his entire world from the ground up, we have to go back to a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before he found it. A cold sidewalk in the city. A woman who collapsed right in front of his car. And a little girl standing over her mother's body, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. A rabbit she called Pip. That Thursday changed everything. But Dominic didn't know it yet. He didn't even know he was already looking at the 2 people who would take his life apart and put it back together in a shape he didn't recognize. He was about to find out. Welcome back to the Fireside family. If you've been here before, you already know how we do this. We settle in, we turn the volume up, and we let the story take us somewhere real. If this is your very first time, I'm glad you found your way here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tap that bell. Because this story has turns that even I wasn't ready for, and you don't want to miss a single one. Now tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your city, your country, your little corner of the world in the comments. I read every single one. This is a story about what happens when the truth arrives 3 years too late, and what one man does when he realizes the life he was living was built on a lie someone else told for him. Let's go back to where it started. 3 days before everything changed, Dominic Calloway sat 41 floors above the street in a corner office that smelled like cold coffee, leather, and cologne that had been on his skin for 14 hours. His pen moved without hesitation across a contract that would reshape shipping corridors across 3 continents. A merger so large it had its own legal team, its own war room, its own gravity. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city stretched in every direction. Steel and glass and ambition hardened into skyline, and from up here none of it looked fragile. From up here, everything looked like it belonged to him. Because most of it did. His jaw was tight. It was always tight. Dominic Calloway was not a man who relaxed. He was a man who executed, who decided, who moved the world 6 degrees in his direction and called it Tuesday. His phone buzzed against the desk. Not his assistant. She had gone home an hour ago. The screen read, "Lobby Security," and he almost let it ring through. Almost. But something made him pick up. The guard's voice came through steady but careful, the way a man speaks when he isn't sure how much trouble he's about to cause. "Mr. Calloway, there's a situation at the east entrance." A woman collapsed on the sidewalk. She has a small child with her. He almost said, "Handle it." He almost said, "Call an ambulance." That was what a man in his position would say. That was what his father would have said. Delegate, distance, keep moving. But there was something in the guard's voice. A pause. A weight that sat just behind the words, and it made Dominic stand before he understood why. Describe her. Thin. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back. "Sir, the child is very small, maybe 3. She won't let go of the woman's coat." His hand stopped on the edge of the desk. Dark hair pulled back. Early 30s. The air in the room shifted. Or maybe it was just the air in his lungs, because suddenly there wasn't enough of it. His legs moved before his mind caught up. Around the desk, past the conference table still covered in documents, through the outer office where the lights were already dimming on their evening timer. Elevator. His thumb hit the lobby button hard enough to leave a white print on the pad. 27 seconds. He counted without meaning to. The doors opened, and he crossed the marble lobby at a pace that made 2 security guards step forward on instinct, their hands going to their belts before they recognized him. They had never seen their CEO move like this. Not walking, not quite running, but something between the two that carried the kind of urgency no board meeting had ever produced. The revolving door pushed cold air into his face. It tasted like exhaust and the metallic bite of coming rain. And the temperature had dropped since morning, the kind of raw November cold that finds the gaps in your clothing and settles against your bones. He turned left toward the east entrance, and there, under the pale wash of a street lamp, He saw her. She was on the ground. Not dramatically. Not sprawled the way people fall in movies. She was folded, the way a body folds when it simply runs out of fuel, when the knees give first and the rest follows. Her coat was too thin for the season. A cotton thing that might have been navy once, but had faded to something closer to grey. Her shoes were splitting at the soles. Her cheekbone pressed against the concrete, and even from 10 feet away he could see the dark hollows beneath her eyes, the way her collarbone jutted too sharply against skin that used to be warm and full and alive. Sarah. The name hit him somewhere below thought, somewhere in the part of the body that remembers before the brain gives permission. He knew her the way you know a song from the first 2 notes, not from studying it, but from having lived inside it. And here she was, not in a memory, not in the 3 a.m., wondering he never admitted to, but on his sidewalk, on the cold ground outside the building that bore his name, and she looked like she hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks. A little girl crouched beside her, one hand gripping her mother's collar with white-knuckled fingers that were too small for the strength they were exerting. The other hand clutching a stuffed rabbit so worn that its fur had gone flat and thin, patched at least twice, once with tape that had started to peel, the ear on the left side missing entirely. The girl's face was still, the way children's faces go still when they are past crying and into something quieter and far more frightening. She was watching her mother's closed eyes with a concentration that no 3-year-old should know how to hold. Then she looked up at him. If you've ever locked eyes with a child who is terrified and trying not to show it, you know what that does. It doesn't ask. It doesn't accuse. It just lands, heavy and clean, and it stays. The girl looked up at Dominic Calloway, a man who controlled a financial empire that spanned 6 countries, a man whose signature could move markets, and in that single upward glance, everything he had built, every wall, every careful distance, every year of telling himself he had made the right choices, cracked down the center like ice over deep water. He didn't call the ambulance first. He didn't signal the guards. He crossed the remaining distance in 4 steps, dropped to his knees on the wet concrete in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he said her name. Sarah. She didn't open her eyes, and the little girl pulled the rabbit tighter against her chest and whispered 2 words that Dominic Calloway would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. Fix, Mummy. He didn't wait for the guards. He didn't call for a stretcher. Dominic slid one arm beneath Sarah's shoulders and the other beneath her knees, and he lifted her off the concrete. And the thing that would stay with him, the detail that would sit in his chest for weeks afterward like a stone he couldn't swallow, was how little she weighed. She was nothing in his arms. Not light the way a sleeping person is light, but reduced, diminished, as though the world had been taking from her in small amounts for so long that there was barely anything left to take. Her head fell against his shoulder, because she had no strength to hold it anywhere else, and her hair smelled like damp wool and something faintly sweet beneath it. Vanilla. She had always smelled like vanilla, even when they were 17, sneaking out to sit on the hood of his mother's car in the dark, watching freight trains roll. Through the crossing at the edge of town, her shoulder pressed against his, the whole future still open and unwritten and terrifying in the best possible way. That was 15 years ago. And here she was, collapsed outside his building, weighing nothing, smelling like the same cheap vanilla she'd worn when they were kids who thought love was the simplest thing in the world. The little girl followed. Nobody told her to. She just stood up, tucked the rabbit under one arm, and walked behind Dominic through the revolving door, as though she had been following adults through unfamiliar places her entire short life, and had learned not to ask where they were going. The security team parted. Two of them exchanged a glance. They had watched their CEO cross the lobby at a near run, kneel on a public sidewalk in a $12,000 suit, and carry an unconscious woman through the front doors of his own building without a word of explanation. Nobody asked. Nobody needed to. The look on his face was enough. He took her upstairs, not to a conference room, not to the lobby's back office, to the private suite on the 41st floor, the guest quarters adjacent to his own, with clean sheets and a bed that had never been slept in. His private physician arrived within 20 minutes, a quiet, efficient woman who carried her own equipment and had been on Dominic's personal retainer for 6 years. She examined Sarah while Dominic stood in the hallway with his back against the wall and his hands pressed flat against his thighs, listening to the murmur of clinical assessment through the half-open door. The doctor came out. She pulled the door closed behind her and spoke in the measured tone of someone delivering facts she wished were different. Exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition that's heading toward critical. She's been running on nothing for a long time, Dominic. Whoever she is, she's been surviving, barely. I've started fluids. She needs rest, food, and monitoring. If she'd gone another week like this... She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He nodded once. The doctor left. And then he turned toward the living room. And there was the girl. She was on his couch. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed or called for her mother, or melted down the way most 3-year-olds would when the world tipped sideways. She sat with Pip in her lap, her feet dangling a full 6 inches above the hardwood floor, and she watched Dominic with dark, wide, steady eyes that no child her age should have possessed. There was something finished about her gaze, something that had already seen enough to skip the panic and go straight to waiting. He sat down across from her, slowly, carefully, the way you lower yourself near something precious that you are terrified of breaking. He rested his elbows on his knees, and he looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them spoke for a long 5 seconds. Then she held the rabbit out toward him, extended it with both hands, the way you offer something important to someone who needs it more than you do. "You look sad," she said. Her voice was clear, certain, fully formed in a way that startled him. Not the babbling, half-constructed sentences of most 3-year-olds, but the precise speech patterns of a child, who had spent most of her time around adults, whose conversations had always been serious ones, because there had been no room in her life for anything else. He swallowed. "What's your rabbit's name?" "Pip." "Mama says Pip keeps us safe." "Does he?" She considered this with a seriousness that belonged in a courtroom, not on the face of a toddler sitting on a couch that probably cost more than every piece of furniture she had ever touched combined. "Sometimes," she said, "when it's cold, he doesn't help very much. But he tries." Something cracked in Dominic's chest. Not loudly, not the way things break in stories, not a dramatic shattering, not a gasp. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of a man realizing he was looking at something he didn't have a name for yet. She set Pip carefully against the armrest before she shifted her weight, placed him precisely, adjusted his position once, made sure he was straight. An organizing impulse, a need for order, and Dominic's stomach dropped, because he did the same thing, had done it, since childhood. His mother had done it too, lined up her keys, her glasses, her coffee cup, everything squared to the edge of whatever surface it sat on. It was such a small thing, such a tiny, specific behavior, and this girl did it like she'd been born to it. His housekeeper appeared with a small plate of crackers and a glass of water. The girl took a cracker, looked at it, and broke it precisely in half before eating the first piece. Dominic stopped breathing, because he did that, too, had always done it. Broken the cracker, the cookie, the toast, always in half first, always the smaller piece eaten before the larger. His mother used to laugh about it. She called it the Calloway tax. And here was this girl, this tiny person he had met 15 minutes ago, performing the same ritual with the same automatic precision, as though it had been coded into her bones. She looked around the penthouse while she chewed. Her eyes moved across the walls, the furniture, the wide windows where the city glittered. "Your couch is too clean," she announced. "Does anyone sit on it?" "Not very often," he admitted. "It's very quiet here." She tilted her head to the left, the exact angle, the exact direction Dominic tilted his own when he was working through a problem, and studied him with those dark, serious eyes. "Don't you have a mama?" He couldn't answer, because he was looking at her jawline. The same stubborn angle, the same slight point at the chin that his grandmother used to trace with her finger when he was small, pressing her thumb against the bone and calling it the Calloway signature. This girl had Sarah's warmth, Sarah's gentleness, in the way she offered pip to a stranger. But that jaw, the set of her brow, the tilt of her head, and the way she broke a cracker in half, and the way she squared her rabbit against the armrest before she sat, those were his. The realization didn't arrive like a thought. It arrived like something physical, like a hand pressing flat against his sternum and pushing. He had a daughter. She was 3 years old. And 20 minutes ago she had been standing on a sidewalk in shoes that were falling apart, holding a patched rabbit, watching her mother lie on cold concrete, asking a stranger to fix something that should never have been broken in the first place. Something behind his ribs shifted. Not gently, not cleanly. It moved the way tectonic plates move. Slowly, enormously, rearranging everything above the surface without making a sound. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked into someone's face and seen a piece of yourself staring back at you? That moment, when everything you thought you knew about your own life just shifts beneath your feet. If this story is already pulling you in, go ahead and tap that like button. Because when Sarah wakes up and speaks her first words to Dominic, the temperature in this story drops by about 20 degrees. Dominic didn't go back inside. Not right away. He sat in the hallway between the two rooms. The guest suite where Sarah lay with an IV line feeding fluid back into a body that had gone too long without enough. And the living room where Lily had finally fallen asleep on the couch with Pip tucked beneath her chin. One small hand still curled around the rabbit's remaining ear. He sat on the hardwood floor with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up and his hands hanging between them, and he did something he hadn't done in years. He let himself remember, not in pieces, not in the controlled, carefully edited way he usually permitted the past to surface. A flash of her face, a fragment of her voice, quickly suppressed and filed away under decisions already made. He let the whole thing come, and it came the way water comes through a crack in a wall. Slowly at first, then all at once, and then there was no stopping it. She moved to his neighborhood this summer, before 7th grade. He was 12. She was the girl with the field guide. A battered paperback she carried everywhere, its spine held together with rubber bands, its margins filled with pencil notes in handwriting so small it looked like code. She spent entire afternoons in the park behind his house, sitting cross-legged in the grass, binoculars around her neck, trying to identify every bird that landed in the oak trees along the fence line. He watched her from his bedroom window for 3 days before he finally walked over and asked what she was doing. She looked up at him with dirt on her knees and a pencil behind her ear and said, "Counting who lives here," as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. He thought she was strange. Then he thought she was brave. Braver than anyone he knew, because she didn't seem to care whether he thought she was strange or not. And then, somewhere between the 3rd week and the 4th, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He started calling her Sarah Bird. She pretended to hate it. She didn't hate it. By 15, they were inseparable. She was the only person who made his father's house feel less like a museum, less like a place where voices echoed off marble floors, and every room existed to impress people who would never be comfortable in it. Sarah would sit on his kitchen counter with her legs swinging, eating cereal straight from the box, and she would make him laugh. Not the polite, measured laugh he had learned to produce at his father's dinner parties, but the real kind, the kind that started deep in his stomach and climbed up through his chest and made his ribs ache. She had a gift for finding the absurd in everything, in his family's ridiculous formality, in the way their housekeeper ironed the napkins into swans, in the fact that the Calloway family had a portrait hallway like they were minor royalty instead of people who made their money in shipping containers. When he was with her, the weight of his last name and everything it demanded felt lighter, manageable, almost worth carrying. At 17, they discovered the freight trains. There was a rail crossing at the edge of town where the long cargo lines came through after midnight. Massive, thundering chains of steel that shook the ground and filled the air with the smell of diesel and iron. They would sneak out and sit on the hood of his mother's car, shoulders touching, and watch the cars roll past, each one stamped with the names of cities neither of them had visited. One night, a warm night, late August, the kind of night that feels like the last page of something, Sarah pulled her knees up and rested her chin on them and said, "Every one of those cars is going somewhere we've never been. Doesn't that make you feel small and enormous at the same time?" He didn't have an answer. He just looked at her. The way the distant signal light caught the edge of her profile, the way her hair moved in the draft from the passing train. And he knew, with a certainty that felt older than he was, that he was going to love this woman for the rest of his life. He was 17. He had no idea what that sentence actually cost. At 22, his father intervened, not with anger. That wasn't how the Calloways operated. It was quieter than that, and worse. His father sat him down in the study that smelled like old books and brass polish, the room where every important Calloway decision had been made for 3 generations, and he spoke the way he always spoke, with the calm, immovable authority of a man who had never once been told he was wrong. "She'll hold you back. She'll limit what you can become. You know this. The Ashcrofts are the right match, strategically, financially, generationally. This isn't about what you feel, Dominic. It's about what you're building." Dominic pushed back. For months, he pushed back, argued, refused, left rooms, slammed doors in a house where doors were never slammed. But the pressure didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. His mother's long silences at dinner, the board members who mentioned the Ashcroft name with careful emphasis, the slow, suffocating logic of a life that had been planned by other people long before he was old enough to object to it. It wore him down the way wind wears down stone, not with force but with time. And then came the gala. 300 people, crystal and candlelight. The kind of event where the wine cost more per bottle than most families spent on groceries in a month. Sarah came in a borrowed dress she had altered herself to fit, taken in at the waist, hemmed by hand, a tiny uneven stitch at the neckline that only he would have noticed. She looked more beautiful than anyone in that room, and he knew it, and that made everything worse. He stood across the floor with the words already in his mouth, the careful surgical ending his father had helped him prepare, dressed up in the language of mutual understanding and different paths, and wanting the best for each other, all of it designed to sound like kindness when it was really cowardice. He looked at her across the room. She smiled at him, and he hesitated. But he did it anyway. He watched her face change, not dramatically. There were no tears, no raised voice, no scene for the other guests to whisper about over their champagne. Something simply left her eyes, a light, a trust, a willingness to believe that love was enough to outweigh a last name and a legacy and a fortune, and it didn't come back. She looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment he could see her understanding something she had probably feared for months, that she had lost. Not to another woman, not to a fight, to a spreadsheet, to a strategy, to the quiet machinery of money deciding who mattered. She set down her glass. She picked up her coat, and she walked out of his life with her chin up and her hands steady, and she did not look back. He let her go. That was the real choice, not the words at the gala, not the rehearsed speech, but the silence after, the phone calls he didn't make. The mornings he woke up reaching for someone who wasn't beside him and told himself it was for the best. He let her walk away, and he married the plan his father had drawn up for him, and he told himself over and over that what he felt didn't matter as much as what he was building. And now he was sitting on a hallway floor, still in the suit he had knelt on wet concrete in, and Sarah was 30 feet away with nothing. No savings, no home, no one. And a 3-year-old daughter with his jawline was sleeping on his couch, holding a rabbit together with tape, because that rabbit was the only thing in her life that had never left. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Dominic told himself he let Sarah go because it was the right thing. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He let her go because it was the easy thing. And 3 years later, Easy was lying unconscious in his guest room, and its cost was sleeping on his couch, clutching a patched-up rabbit named Pip. She woke at 11. He heard it from the hallway, the sharp intake of breath, the creak of the bed frame shifting under sudden weight, and then her voice, immediate and fierce, cutting through the quiet of the penthouse like something that had been held underwater, and finally broke the surface. "Where is my daughter?" Not a question. There was no upward lift at the end, no uncertainty, no room for anything other than an answer. The first words from her mouth. Not "where am I?" Not what happened. Not his name. Just Lily. Only Lily. As though everything else in the world, the unfamiliar room, the IV line still taped to the back of her hand, the fact that she was in a building she had never been inside before, was irrelevant noise compared to the single fixed point of her child. Dominic opened the door. She was already on her feet, swaying slightly, one hand braced on the nightstand with a grip that turned her knuckles white. There was no color in her face. The warm flush, he remembered. The way her cheeks used to go pink when she laughed, when she was cold, when she was embarrassed, was gone, replaced by something flat and gray that made her look older than she was. And her eyes, those warm brown eyes that used to look at him like he was the only fixed point in a world that wouldn't stop moving. They were hard now, guarded. There was a wall behind them, that hadn't been there 4 years ago. Something built brick by brick over long nights and empty rooms and unanswered prayers, and it was thick, and it was high, and it was not coming down for him. "Lily's asleep," he said. He kept his voice low, steady, the way he spoke in boardrooms when the stakes were highest and the room needed someone who wasn't going to flinch. "Guest room down the hall. She ate dinner. She's safe." One exhale. Her shoulders dropped 1 inch. A single involuntary release of tension that she probably didn't even know she'd given away. For half a second, the wall flickered. Then it went back up, taller than before. "I need to go." She reached for the coat. That too thin cotton coat draped over the chair beside the bed. The same coat she'd been wearing on the sidewalk. The one that offered about as much protection from November as a paper napkin. He watched her fingers close around the collar and pull it toward her, and he spoke carefully, not with authority, but with the quiet precision of a man choosing every word like it might be the last one she let him say. "You collapsed on a sidewalk, Sarah. Outside my building. Your daughter was standing over you in the cold. You need to stay." "I was tired. It happens." She said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. Flat, dismissed, already moving past it. Her legs were shaking. He could see the tremor in her calves, the way her knees locked and unlocked as she tried to hold herself upright through will alone. She pressed her hands against her stomach, palms flat, fingers spread, the way she had always done when she was fighting tears. He remembered that gesture. He had seen it at the gala, the last time he'd looked at her face before she turned and walked away. Hands pressed to her stomach, holding herself together from the outside because something inside was coming apart. "You need rest," the doctor said. "I don't need your doctor. I don't need your guest room. We're fine. We're fine." She said it the way a soldier says the bleeding stopped, with finality, with force, with absolutely no interest in whether it was true. He stood in the doorway, not blocking it. He would never do that. Not to her, not to anyone, but especially not to her. He stood to the side, one shoulder against the frame, leaving the path clear, making sure she knew she could walk through it whenever she wanted. He wasn't trapping her. He was asking her to stay. And there was a difference. And he needed her to feel it. Then the old name slipped out. He didn't plan it. It rose from somewhere beneath his ribs, from the same place that had recognized the vanilla in her hair, from the part of him that was still 17, on the hood of a car watching freight trains. "Sarah Bird." She flinched. It was small, a tightening around her mouth, a flicker behind her eyes, like a match struck in a dark room that guttered out before it could catch. The name landed somewhere deep, somewhere she had sealed off and boarded over and refused to visit, and for 1 second, one raw, unguarded second, the wall wavered. He saw it, the tremor in her jaw, the way her breath caught and held, the way her eyes went bright with something that wasn't anger. Then it held. The wall held. She rebuilt it right there in front of him, in real time, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and cold and final. "Don't call me that. You lost the right to call me that." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. It sat between them like a third person, like the ghost of every phone call he never made, and every morning he woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. And in that silence, Dominic saw her eyes move, not to him, past him, to the hallway behind his shoulder, toward the room at the end of the hall where Lily slept. And something crossed her face that wasn't anger, wasn't bitterness, wasn't the hard-edged defiance she had been wearing like armor since she opened her eyes. It was fear, the specific bone-deep fear of a mother who has been the only barrier between her child and a world that has offered them nothing. No safety net, no second chances, no margin for error, for 3 years straight. The fear of a woman who knew, even as she said, "We're fine." That fine had run out a long time ago. That fine was a word she used to keep moving, when stopping meant admitting how close to the edge they really were. She didn't admit it. She crossed the hallway on legs that trembled with every step, walked into the room where Lily slept, and closed the door behind her with a soft, deliberate click. Dominic stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to nothing. Listening to the silence of a closed door, and the distant hum of a city 41 floors below, and the sound of his own breathing in a home that had never felt this full or this empty at the same time. She believed he knew. That was the thing that pressed against his chest like a hand that wouldn't lift. She had written him a letter. She had told him about Lily. And when he never responded, when weeks became months, became years of absolute silence, she built the only story that made sense. He read it. He knew. And he chose to look away. She had been carrying that story for 3 years, raising their daughter alone inside it, and it had hardened into something she no longer questioned. It was simply true. He knew. And he didn't come. She was wrong, but she didn't know that yet. And standing in the hallway outside a closed door, Dominic didn't know it either. Sarah sent that man a letter, poured her heart onto the page, waited 3 years, and never heard a single word back. She believed he read it and chose silence. She's looking at him right now, standing in his penthouse, surrounded by his wealth, and she believes he knew about Lily and walked away. What would that do to you? What would it turn you into? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happens the next morning at that kitchen island cuts deep. He didn't sleep, not a minute. Not even the shallow, restless half-sleep of a man who closes his eyes and pretends. Dominic sat at his kitchen island through the entire night, a glass of water in front of him that he never touched, and he turned the same questions over and over like stones in his hands, examining each one from every angle, finding no comfort in any of them. How long had she been on the street? Where had she been living? She'd had savings once. Not much, but enough for a start. Enough for a woman who had always been careful with what little she had. What happened to it? Who had been helping her? Had anyone been helping her, or had she done all of it alone? Every night, every meal, every decision, with no one standing beside her, and a 3-year-old who needed everything? And beneath all of those questions, sitting in his chest like something swallowed that refused to go down, was the one he couldn't bring himself to form completely. The one that had been pressing against the inside of his ribs since the moment Lily looked up at him on that sidewalk, with his grandmother's jawline and his mother's habit of breaking things in half. Is she mine? Morning came grey and cold. The city outside the windows looked washed out. The skyline reduced to silhouettes behind a low ceiling of cloud that turned everything the same flat shade of pewter. The penthouse was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a conversation neither person is ready to have. Sarah emerged at dawn. She came down the hallway slowly, cautiously, the way someone moves through a space they don't trust, checking corners, measuring exits, cataloging every detail that might matter if she needed to leave fast. Lily was on her hip, one arm looped around her mother's neck, Pip dangling from the girl's other fist by his remaining ear. Sarah had smoothed her hair back. She had straightened her clothes. She had done everything she could to reassemble herself into someone who looked like she was managing, and the effort was visible. And that made it worse. Dominic poured coffee, set out toast on a plate, placed a small glass of orange juice near the edge of the island where a child could reach it. He did all of this without speaking, without rushing, without making any movement that could be interpreted as pressure. Then he sat back down on his stool and wrapped his hands around his own mug and said, as carefully as he had ever said anything in his life, "Lily's father. Is he in the picture?" Sarah lifted Lily onto the stool beside her. She adjusted the collar of the girl's shirt, a small automatic gesture, the kind of tenderness that has been performed 10,000 times and no longer requires thought, the muscle memory of a woman who has been the only anchor for 3 years running. Her fingers smoothed the fabric flat. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were level and steady and gave away absolutely nothing. "He's not in the picture." She held his gaze while she said it. The words were technically true, every syllable technically accurate. But they weren't the truth. They were a wall shaped like a sentence, placed between them with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this answer so many times it no longer felt like evasion. It felt like fact. He could see the architecture of it, the way she'd built this response to be load-bearing, to hold the weight of any follow-up question without cracking. He let it stand, not because he believed it, because pushing now would mean losing her again, and he had already done that once, and the cost was sitting 3 feet away eating toast. "Can Pip have some?" Lily held the rabbit toward the plate with an expectant look, as though the question were perfectly reasonable, and the only possible answer was yes. "Pip doesn't eat toast, sweetheart. Pip eats everything. He's very hungry." Lily said this with the calm authority of someone stating a well-documented scientific fact. She placed Pip on the counter beside the plate, propped him against the napkin holder, and tore a small corner of toast off. She set it in front of the rabbit and nodded, satisfied. Sarah's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not the full, open thing that used to come so easily. It sounded like running water when it turned into a laugh. But the ghost of it, the outline, proof that it still existed somewhere beneath the walls, and the weariness, and the years of holding everything together with nothing. Lily picked up the orange juice with both hands, drank carefully, set it down, and looked at Dominic's coffee with open suspicion. "Why is your water brown?" "It's coffee. Can Pip have some?" Pip might not like coffee. Pip likes everything. I told you. He's very hungry. She paused, considering. Then, with the matter-of-fact delivery of a child who has no concept of what her words reveal, she added, "We usually eat at the place with the red door, but they don't have brown water there, either." The air in the room changed. Dominic saw Sarah's hand stop mid-reach, frozen for just a fraction of a second, fingers hovering above her coffee mug, before she completed the movement and brought the cup to her lips as though nothing had happened. "Lily, eat your toast. I'm telling him about the red door. Eat your toast, please." Lily looked at her mother, then at Dominic. Then she shrugged and picked up her toast and broke it in half. The smaller piece first, the Calloway tax, performed without thought by a child who had never been told it was a family trait, and the conversation moved on. But the damage was done. The place with the red door Dominic filed it away the way he filed away everything that mattered, silently, precisely, in the part of his mind that didn't forget. A shelter, a soup kitchen, a food bank. Whatever it was the place where his daughter had been eating her meals. And she mentioned it the way children mention facts, without shame, without understanding what it costs a mother to hear her child say it out loud in front of the man who could have prevented all of it. Sarah's deflection wasn't about pride. He could see that now. It wasn't about stubbornness or independence, or the hard-edged refusal to accept help that he might have mistaken it for last night. It was about Lily. It was the specific, targeted shame of a mother who had done everything she could, worked every job, stretched every dollar, sat in every waiting room, and still ended up at the place with the red door. Her shame wasn't for herself. It was for what her daughter had been through, for what Lily thought was normal. Dominic watched Sarah feed toast to a 3-year-old girl who had his face, his habits, his bloodline written into the way she tilted her head and broke her food and organized her rabbit before sitting down. The 4 years between then and now felt like they weighed more than anything he had ever carried. More than the merger, more than the company, more than the name and the legacy, and the empire that bore it. Because weight isn't measured in pounds. It's measured in the things you can't undo. Now listen. If you're sitting there right now with your heart in your throat, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and tap that bell, because this story is just getting started. And what's coming next? I promise you, you are not ready. If this story has already grabbed hold of you, go ahead and smash that like button and let me know you're riding with me. Because in the very next scene, a 3-year-old girl is about to do something that $1 billion couldn't. She's going to make Dominic Calloway sit on the floor. Children are wrecking balls wrapped in softness. They don't knock on the walls you've built around yourself. They walk straight through them like the walls were never there. Because to a child, they weren't. A child doesn't see your armor. A child sees you. And that is the most dangerous thing in the world for a man who has spent his entire adult life making sure no one gets close enough to see anything at all. Lily dismantled Dominic Calloway in a single afternoon. It started after breakfast, after Sarah retreated to the guest room to shower and change into clothes. His housekeeper had quietly provided. Simple things, soft things, clothes that fit. And Lily was left in the living room with Pip and a penthouse full of objects she had never encountered before. She didn't sit quietly. She didn't play by herself in a corner the way Dominic half expected, the way he might have done as a child in an unfamiliar home. She followed him, everywhere, through the hallway, into his study, back to the kitchen, past the windows, through every room like a small, relentless satellite locked into his orbit, asking why about everything in a voice that carried no shyness and no hesitation whatsoever. Why are the windows so big? So you can see the city. Why do you want to see the city? Because it's interesting. Why? Because there are a lot of people down there. Why don't they come up here? He didn't have an answer for that one. She moved on before he needed one. Why is your couch so white? Why do your shoes make that sound? Why is the floor so shiny? Do you polish it? Who polishes it? Can I polish it? Each question arrived on the heels of the last rapid fire, delivered with the genuine bewilderment of a person encountering wealth for the first time and finding it deeply, fundamentally strange. And she was right. Seen through her eyes, all of it was strange. The size of the rooms, the silence, the fact that one person lived in a space big enough for 20. She didn't admire it. She interrogated it. And every question she asked, made Dominic hear his own life differently than he had before. Then she found the aquarium. It was built into the far wall of the living room, a floor-to-ceiling saltwater tank, custom installed, maintained weekly by a service that cost more per month than most apartment leases. Lily stopped mid-sentence when she saw it. Her entire body went still. Then she walked toward it slowly, both hands rising to press flat against the glass, her mouth open, her eyes wide, Pip forgotten on the floor behind her. A blue tang drifted close. It turned, caught the light, and floated toward the glass where her small hands were pressed. And Lily gasped with her whole body, not just her mouth, her whole self, shoulders rising, spine straightening, head tilting back as if the fish had just performed something miraculous. "He's looking at me." She turned to Dominic with an expression of absolute astonishment. "He's looking at me. I think he is. His name is Bubble." She said this with total authority, the way a queen issues a decree. There was no discussion, no alternatives considered. The fish was Bubble now, and that was final. "You have to call him Bubble now. That's his name." "Bubble," Dominic repeated, and something in his chest shifted. Not the heavy, painful shifting from last night, but something lighter, something warm that he didn't have a name for yet. She took his hand, didn't ask, didn't hesitate. Her small fingers closed around two of his, and she pulled with surprising strength toward the floor. "Come sit down. Bubble wants to show you something." And Dominic Calloway, a man whose signature moved markets, whose phone calls rearranged shipping lanes across entire oceans, whose name appeared on buildings in 4 countries, sat down on his own hardwood floor, cross-legged, in a custom suit, and let a 3-year-old explain to him what a fish named Bubble was thinking. "He's saying hello. See? That's his hello swim. He goes left, then right, then he does the wiggle. The wiggle means he likes you." She leaned against Dominic's arm as she narrated, her weight warm and unconscious, as though leaning against this man she had met less than 24 hours ago was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't stop at Bubble. Within the hour, she had named everything in the penthouse that held still long enough to receive a title. The large potted plant beside the window became Gerald. A smooth, decorative stone on the bookshelf became Egg. A glass paperweight on his desk became Captain Shiny. And his briefcase, the $40,000 Italian leather case that had accompanied him to meetings in 6 countries and 3 continents, became the Grumpy Box, because, as Lily explained with devastating logic, it looks grumpy and you put things in it, so it's a grumpy box. Each name was delivered with absolute certainty, and Dominic accepted each one without a single objection. He had closed deals with heads of state and never blinked. This 3-year-old had him agreeing that his briefcase was called Grumpy Box, and he didn't hesitate for a second. Sarah watched from the doorway. She had come back down the hallway at some point, hair still damp, wearing the borrowed clothes that were slightly too big at the shoulders, and she stood in the doorframe with one hand resting against the wood, and watched her daughter sit on the floor beside a man worth $11 billion, explaining to him the emotional life of a blue tang named Bubble. Something crossed her face that was complicated and raw and difficult to look at, something she hadn't given herself permission to feel in a very long time. Her fingers tightened on the doorframe until her knuckles went white. "Mama, the tall man is nice." "Is he?" Sarah's voice was neutral, perfectly controlled. But her knuckles stayed white, and her eyes stayed on Dominic, and whatever was happening behind that wall of hers. It was costing her something to keep it contained. By evening, the penthouse had transformed. Not physically. Nothing had moved, nothing had changed. But the silence that Lily had noticed the night before, that vast and empty quiet that had prompted her to ask if Dominic had a mama, was gone, replaced by her voice, her questions, her running commentary on Gerald's leaves and Egg's smoothness, and whether Captain Shiny could see them through his glass. The space felt inhabited in a way it never had. Lived in, warm, and then came the moment. Dominic was sitting on the couch, the too clean couch, reviewing emails on his phone that he wasn't actually reading, scrolling without seeing, his mind 40 floors below on a cold sidewalk, and 3 years behind in a letter he never received. Lily appeared at his knee. She looked up at him with those dark, steady eyes, and she announced, with the gravity of someone bestowing an honor, "Tall man Dominic, that's me. You're promoted." Promoted to what? She didn't answer. She climbed into his lap, without asking, without waiting, with the terrifying complete trust of a child who has decided you are safe, and she settled against his chest like she had always been there. Pip went under one arm. Her head found the space just below his collarbone. Her eyes were heavy, blinking slow. "Can Bubble come sleep with us?" His throat tightened. "Bubble has to stay in his tank, sweetheart." "That's sad." "Yeah." His voice came out rough, uneven. "Yeah, it is." His hand came up slowly, so slowly, as if he were afraid the weight of it might break her, and rested on her back. She was so small, so impossibly, terrifyingly small. He could feel her heartbeat through her shirt, fast and light, the heartbeat of something fragile and alive, and completely dependent on the adults around her to keep the world from falling in. She fell asleep in under 2 minutes. Her breathing went slow and even. Her weight, feather-light and world-ending at the same time, settled into his chest, and he didn't move. He didn't shift. He didn't reach for his phone or check his watch or do any of the 100 things a man like him would normally do when time was passing. He sat perfectly still and held his daughter while she slept, and he breathed when she breathed, and he felt something rebuild itself inside him that he thought had been demolished years ago. Across the room, Sarah sat in an armchair with her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She watched her daughter sleep in the arms of a man she had spent 3 years trying to forget. A man she believed had read her letter and chosen silence. A man who was now holding their child against his chest with the careful, reverent stillness of someone cradling something holy. And whatever she felt, whatever war was raging behind that quiet, disciplined face, she held it inside with the same fierce control that had kept her standing, when standing was all she had left. If Lily naming that briefcase Grumpy Box didn't just make your whole day, I don't know what will. Listen, if you know someone who needs this story today, send them this video right now. Share it with them. Because what walks through Dominic's front door in the next 60 seconds changes everything, and not for the better. The front door opened at 9:14 the next morning, and no one had buzzed up. Dominic heard the click of the lock first, the specific, familiar sound of a key turning in a mechanism that only 3 people in the world had access to. Then the soft rush of the door sweeping across the marble entry. Then heels, measured, precise, each step landing with the exact same interval as the one before. the rhythm of someone who had practiced walking into rooms until the walking itself became a statement. Vivienne Ashcroft didn't knock. She had never knocked. She had a key because she was his fiancée, because their engagement had been announced in 4 newspapers and covered by 2 financial magazines, because the merger of their family's holdings was considered one of the most significant private consolidations in the industry's recent history. She let herself in wearing a cream cashmere coat that probably cost more than the monthly rent on most apartments in the city. Her blonde hair swept back in a style that looked effortless and had almost certainly taken an hour to achieve. Her heels clicked against the marble with the confidence of someone who owned every room she walked into, because, in the world she moved through, she usually did. She found Dominic on the living room floor. Again, Lily had recruited him for a new project, a tower made entirely of coasters, collected from various surfaces throughout the penthouse and stacked with the painstaking care of structural engineers working on a skyscraper. Dominic was carefully balancing the last one, his fingers steady, his breathing shallow, while Lily crouched beside him with her hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes enormous. Pip watched from the sidelines, propped against a throw pillow, his single ear tilted toward the construction, as though he too understood the gravity of the moment. Vivienne stopped in the archway. Her eyes tracked the scene with the efficiency of a camera scanning a room. Dominic, on the floor in casual clothes, his suit jacket abandoned somewhere, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. The child, small, dark-haired, utterly focused on a tower of coasters, sitting close enough to Dominic that their shoulders nearly touched. The coasters themselves, arranged with absurd precision, a monument to nothing, occupying the attention of a man who ran a global shipping empire. And then the hallway, where movement had just appeared, where Sarah had emerged carrying 2 mugs of tea, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing borrowed clothes that fit her better than the ones she'd arrived in. Everything in Vivienne went still, not frozen. That would have implied surprise, and Vivienne Ashcroft was never surprised. Controlled. She was seeing exactly the scenario she had worked for 3 years to prevent, and she had trained herself never to react without calculation. Her face remained pleasant. Her posture remained perfect. But something behind her eyes shifted into a different gear, something that assessed and calculated and filed away every detail for later use. Well, her voice was warm at the edges and cold at the center, the vocal equivalent of a smile that didn't reach the eyes. This is a surprise. She crossed the room with that same measured pace, not hurrying, not hesitating, moving like someone who had rehearsed this entrance for a different context, but was adapting flawlessly. She stopped in front of Sarah and extended her hand. The nails were flawless, pale pink, shaped to precise ovals, not a chip or imperfection visible. The handshake lasted exactly 1 second too long. How lovely that you found your way here. Dominic has always been generous. Sarah's face didn't change. She accepted the handshake with the same neutral expression she'd worn since last night. That wall firmly in place, giving nothing away. But something passed between the 2 women in that moment. A recognition, not politeness, not introduction, territory. Each of them understood exactly what the other represented, and neither of them was foolish enough to say it out loud. The coaster tower chose that moment to fall. All 17 coasters collapsed in a cascade of soft clatters, and Lily let out a wail of theatrical despair before immediately beginning to rebuild, her crisis forgotten within seconds. In the silence that followed the collapse, Vivienne turned her attention to Dominic with a smile that managed to be both affectionate and pointed. "Darling, might I borrow you for a moment? There are some arrangements we need to discuss. For the benefit. The benefit. A charity gala 3 weeks away that Vivienne had been organizing for months. An event that would feature their names on every piece of promotional material, their faces photographed together for every society page in the city. The benefit was theatre, and they both knew it, and Vivienne was invoking it now as a reminder of what he had agreed to, what he had chosen. They stepped into the study. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the moment the latch caught, Vivienne's mask dropped completely. She didn't shout. She never shouted. That wasn't how the Ashcrofts handled conflict. She spoke in low, measured sentences that landed like surgical instruments, precise, clean, designed to cut exactly where they would cause the most damage while leaving the smallest visible scar. You need to remember what you chose. Her fingers pressed into his sleeve, just enough pressure to signal ownership, just enough to make clear that she considered this conversation not a negotiation, but a correction. That woman, whoever she is to you, she's your past. I'm your future. Don't confuse the two. Dominic didn't move, didn't pull away. He stood there and let her speak, because he needed to hear it. He needed to hear exactly who he had aligned himself with. I know you, Dominic. Vivienne stepped closer, her voice dropping, her eyes fixed on his with an intensity that might have passed for intimacy if it weren't so calculated. You see someone in trouble, and you want to fix it. That's what makes you good at what you do. That's what makes you valuable. But this isn't a company you can restructure. This is a woman with a child, and the math on that equation never ends well for the man who writes the checks. Trust me, I've seen it before. The gratitude turns to expectation. The expectation turns to resentment. And suddenly, you're trapped in a situation that costs you everything you've built. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you confused charity with obligation. It was chilling because it was almost reasonable. She wasn't ranting. She wasn't making accusations. She was laying out a logical argument, step by step, in the calm tone of someone offering financial advice. And if Sarah had been anyone else, if Lily had been anyone else, the argument might even have made sense. That was what made it dangerous. Vivienne wasn't wrong about the pattern. She was wrong about the people. She has a daughter, Dominic said. His voice was quiet, level, giving away nothing. Something flickered behind Vivienne's eyes, brief, controlled, a calculation running, possibilities being assessed, outcomes being weighted. Her expression didn't change, but her pause lasted half a second longer than it should have. How sad for her. She said it the way someone might comment on a stranger's misfortune in a newspaper. Detached, appropriate, entirely without warmth. 4 words that contained no curiosity, no compassion, no acknowledgement that the child in question was currently sitting in the next room, naming coasters and talking to a one-eared rabbit. Vivienne picked up her bag from where she'd set it on his desk. She checked her reflection briefly in the darkened window. She crossed to where he stood and kissed his cheek, a gesture of ownership disguised as affection, her lips cool against his skin, her perfume expensive and sharp. I'll see you tonight. We have the dinner with the Halpins. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. Her heels clicked down the hallway. Same measured pace. Not faster. Not slower. The sound of a woman who had delivered her message and expected it to be received. But her hand, the one she'd rested on his arm, the one she'd pressed into his sleeve to remind him who had claimed to his future, trembled once before she pushed through the front door. And Dominic stood alone in his study, looking at the space where she had been, and felt something clarify inside him that had been clouded for years. The penthouse was quiet in a different way now. Not the empty silence Lily had noticed on her first night. The silence of a space that had never been properly lived in. This was the silence that follows a storm. The weighted stillness of a room that has absorbed too many words and is still processing them. Vivienne was gone. Lily was asleep in the guest room, Pip tucked under her arm, her breathing slow and even. Sarah had retreated to the room beside her daughters, the door closed, the light visible beneath it for another hour before it finally went dark. Dominic sat in his study. He hadn't turned on the desk lamp. The city provided enough light through the windows, that constant, restless glow that never fully went away, no matter the hour. He wasn't working. He wasn't reading. He was sitting in the chair where he had stood across from Vivienne 3 hours ago and trying to reconcile the life he had agreed to live with the life that had walked through his front door 2 days ago. Margot appeared in the doorway, without a sound. She carried a small tray with a single cup of tea, steam rising in a thin curl, and she crossed the room and set it on the desk with the quiet efficiency that had defined her presence in this household for 20 years. She was 63. She had worked for the Calloway family since before Dominic took over the company, since before his father's decline, since before most of the staff who had once filled the family estate had been let go one by one as the old generation gave way to the new. She did not gossip. She did not volunteer opinions. She expressed herself through the things she chose to do and not do, through meaningful silences, through the precise weight of her pauses. Tonight, she paused. The tea sat on a coaster, one of the coasters from Lily's tower. Dominic realized. The tower had collapsed twice, had been rebuilt twice, and now here was one of its pieces, placed deliberately beneath his cup. He looked past Margot toward the living room, and there on the shelf beside the window, arranged with careful precision, was the rest of the tower. Rebuilt, preserved, placed like an art piece, like something worth keeping. Margot had done that without being asked, without saying a word. He looked up at her. "What is it, Margot?" She straightened the tea tray, adjusted the napkin so its edge aligned perfectly with the tray's corner. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. But something in the quality of her stillness was different tonight. Heavier. "The little girl asked me if I had a rabbit," she said. Her voice was neutral, carefully so. "I told her I didn't. She said I should get one, because everyone needs something soft to hold when the world gets loud." Something shifted in Dominic's chest, a warmth that hurt. "What did you say?" "I told her she was right." Margot moved toward the door. Her steps were unhurried, measured, the same pace she had maintained for 2 decades of service. But at the threshold, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Her hand rested on the doorframe, and her shoulders rose once with a breath that seemed to carry more weight than air. "There's something I need to give you. I'll bring it in the morning. I should have brought it sooner." She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the silence that followed was different from any silence before. It was heavy with something unsaid. A weight she had been carrying, a decision she had been putting off, a loyalty she was about to prove in a way that would cost her everything or nothing, depending on what Dominic chose to do with it. He sat in the dark for a long time after she left. the tea growing cold on its coaster, and wondered what a woman who never spoke out of turn had been holding on to all this time. Margot has been keeping something for 3 years. She was told to destroy it, and she didn't. Now, I need you to think about that. Why would a housekeeper who has worked for this family for 20 years risk everything to keep a secret? Drop your theory in the comments right now and smash that like button, because what Margot brings Dominic next morning, it's the moment this entire story cracks wide open. Margot came at 7 the next morning. She didn't knock on the study door. She simply appeared in the frame, the way she always did, as though she had materialized from the quiet itself. In her hands was a box. Small, unremarkable. The kind of box you might use to store old photographs or letters. The kind that sits in the back of a closet for years because no one can quite bring themselves to throw it away or open it. She crossed the room and set it on his desk without ceremony. Her face betrayed nothing. Her voice was level, measured, the same tone she might use to announce that dinner was ready or that his dry cleaning had arrived. Miss Ashcroft asked me to dispose of this 3 years ago. I didn't. She didn't explain. She didn't justify. She didn't wait for questions or offer context. She simply turned and walked out of the study, closing the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to seal the room off from the rest of the world. Dominic sat very still for a long moment. The box sat on the desk in front of him, ordinary and devastating, waiting. The morning light came through the windows at a low angle, catching the dust motes in the air, making the whole room feel suspended, held in place between one breath and the next. He opened the box. The scarf was on top. He recognized it before he touched it. The soft blue wool, slightly faded at the edges, the weave loosened in places from years of use. He picked it up, and the moment it reached his hands, the scent hit him. Vanilla, faint but unmistakable, woven into the fabric like a memory that refused to fade. And for one disorienting second, he wasn't in his study anymore. He was 17, sitting on the hood of his mother's car at the rail crossing, the engine ticking as it cooled, the sky enormous and black above them. Sarah's scarf was draped across the dashboard, and she was pointing at the stars, trying to find constellations she'd read about in a book, laughing when she couldn't connect the dots, her breath visible in the cold air. He could hear her voice. He could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his. He could smell the vanilla. He set the scarf down carefully, as though it might shatter if he handled it wrong. Beneath it was a photograph. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded the way photographs fade when they've been held too many times, looked at too often. 2 people, 19 years old, standing somewhere green. A park, maybe, or the edge of a field. Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair caught mid-movement, her whole body expressing a joy so complete it almost hurt to look at. And beside her, looking at her, instead of the camera, was him. Dominic at 19, younger, softer, looking at her like the rest of the world was noise, like nothing that existed outside the frame of that photograph mattered or ever would. He stared at the 2 people in the image and barely recognized them. Not because they looked different. The faces were the same, the bones, the basic architecture, but because they looked free. They looked like people who hadn't learned yet that love could be overruled by boardrooms and legacy, and the quiet machinery of family expectation. They looked like people who still believed that wanting something badly enough was the same as keeping it. He set the photograph beside the scarf. The wildflower was pressed between 2 index cards, held flat by a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. He removed it carefully, holding the cards apart just enough to see. The flower had lost most of its color. Whatever bright shade it had once been had faded to something closer to parchment, the petals thin and fragile as tissue paper. But the shape was still there. The form was still intact. She had picked this flower at some point. She had kept it. She had pressed it between cards and stored it in a box with a photograph and a scarf. Because these things mattered. Because they were evidence of something real, and someone had tried to erase it. Someone had asked Margot to dispose of this box, to throw it away, to burn it, to make it disappear, and Margot had refused, had kept it hidden for 3 years, had watched him move through this penthouse with Vivienne's name on his calendar and Vivienne's coat in his closet, and had said nothing, done nothing, until a collapsed woman on a sidewalk and a little girl with his face had changed the equation. He set the cards down, and then he saw the envelope. It sat at the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, as though it had been placed there first and the other items layered on top to protect it. His name was written on the front in handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. Sarah's particular slant, the way she always pressed too hard on the downstrokes, the slight flourish on the final letter of his name that she'd added since they were kids. The postmark was visible in the corner. Dated 4 months after the gala. 4 months after he had stood across a room full of crystal and candlelight and ended the best thing that had ever happened to him. The seal was intact, never opened. He turned the envelope over in his hands. Someone had received this letter. Someone had seen it arrive. Someone had looked at Sarah's handwriting on the front, had read his name, had understood exactly what this envelope was and who it was from and what it might contain. And someone had made a choice, deliberately, consciously, with full understanding of the consequences, that he would never see it. The seal had never been broken, which meant whoever intercepted it hadn't even bothered to read what Sarah had written. They hadn't needed to. The return address, the handwriting, the timing, that had been enough. The letter itself was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was making sure it never reached him. Dominic's hands were steady when he slid his thumb beneath the flap and broke the seal. His breathing was not. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten. The paper had softened with age, the edges worn in places where fingers had held it, folded it, unfolded it again. The ink was blue, the same shade Sarah had always used, the cheap ballpoint pens she bought in packs of 12 from the drugstore because she said expensive pens made her nervous about wasting words. In places, the ink had smeared, the letters blurred into soft shadows where moisture had fallen on the page and been wiped away. Tears. He knew that, without having to think about it. He could see exactly where she had paused, where her hand had stopped moving, where she had pressed the pen deeper into the paper to force herself to continue. He read it slowly. The narrator's voice shifted, quieter now, waited, giving each word the space it needed to land. I'm not writing this to change your mind. I know the decision was made for both of us, and I know you believe it was the right one. I've accepted that. I've had to accept it, because the alternative was spending the rest of my life waiting for something that wasn't going to happen, and I couldn't do that to myself. But I found out something last month, and I think you deserve to know. I'm going to have a baby. Yours. Ours. I don't know how to say it any other way than that. I'm not asking you to choose. I know what your life looks like now, and I know where I fit in it, which is nowhere. I'm just asking you to know. That's all. I thought about not telling you at all. I thought about just disappearing and letting you live your life without ever having to think about this. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep this from you and live with myself. If you want to be part of this, I'm here. I'll always be here. You know where to find me. If you don't, I understand. I won't ask again. I won't write again. This is the only time I'll reach out. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Whatever you decide, I hope you're happy. I mean that. Even now, after everything, I mean that. I hope the life you chose is everything you wanted it to be. Sarah. Dominic, read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words cut differently. The first reading was shock, the second was devastation, the third was something colder, something that settled into his bones and stayed there. He pressed his palms flat against the desk. He stayed very still. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, the way he did in board meetings when the numbers turned against him, when the room needed someone who wouldn't flinch. But this wasn't a board meeting. This was his daughter. This was the woman he had loved since he was 12 years old. This was 3 years of silence that he had never chosen. 3 years. 3 years Sarah waited for a response that never came. 3 years she believed he had received this letter, this gentle, undemanding, impossibly kind letter, and chosen silence. Chosen nothing. Chosen to let her and their child disappear, as though they had never mattered at all. She thought he knew. She thought he knew about Lily, and walked away anyway. And now, every cold moment from the past 3 days rearranged itself in his mind. Every wall she had put up, every guarded word, every flinch when he got too close. It all made sense now. Devastating, horrible sense. We're fine. That wasn't pride. That was protection. She was protecting Lily from a man who, in her understanding, already knew about his daughter and didn't care. Why would she accept help from someone like that? Why would she let her child get attached to someone who had already proven he could walk away? He's not in the picture. That wasn't evasion. That was accuracy. As far as she knew, he had removed himself from the picture when he chose not to reply. She wasn't hiding the truth. She was stating it. The truth as she understood it. The truth that had been constructed for her by someone else's silence. You lost the right to call me that. That wasn't anger. That was grief. The grief of a woman who had reached out one final time, who had offered him everything she had left to offer, and heard nothing but silence for 3 years straight. Of course, she didn't want him using the old name. The old name belonged to the boy who loved her. The man who ignored her letter didn't deserve it. Dominic sat alone in his study for 45 minutes. The city moved outside the windows. Cars, pedestrians, the endless churn of a world that didn't know or care what was happening 41 floors above it. The fish tank hummed its constant, quiet hum. Bubble drifted past the glass, oblivious and serene. And somewhere down the hall, Lily laughed. High and clear and bright. The sound children make when the world gives them something wonderful. A funny face, a tumbling tower, a rabbit who suddenly seemed to be dancing. The sound reached him through the closed door and pressed against his chest like a hand. His daughter. 3 years without him. 3 years of the place with the red door, of shoes that split at the soles, of a mother who collapsed on sidewalks because there was nothing left to run on. Not because he chose to leave. Not because he decided she didn't matter. Because someone chose for him. Someone intercepted a letter and buried it in a box and asked the housekeeper to destroy it. And when the housekeeper refused, that person simply moved on with her life as though nothing had happened. And that's the thing about silence, isn't it? We think silence is empty. We think it's the absence of something, the absence of words, of action, of decision. But silence is the loudest lie there is. Because when someone is waiting for your answer, when someone has poured their heart onto a page and sent it across the city and sat by the mailbox every day for weeks hoping for a reply, the silence speaks for you. It says things you never said. It makes decisions you never made. It builds a story in the mind of the person waiting. And by the time you find out the story exists, the damage has already been done. 3 years of damage. 3 years of a woman raising his child alone, believing he knew, believing he didn't care, building walls thick enough to keep out the kind of pain that comes from loving someone who chose not to love you back. Except he hadn't chosen. He hadn't known. And the person who made sure of that was currently planning their engagement party. Dominic picked up the letter. He folded it carefully along its original creases. He placed it in his jacket pocket, against his chest, where he could feel the weight of it. Then he stood, and he went to find Vivienne. 3 years? She waited 3 years for a reply that was stolen before he ever touched it. If that just hit you the way it hit me, leave a like on this video, because this story deserves to be heard. And hold on tight, because Dominic is about to stand face to face with the woman who stole those years from him. And what she says when he confronts her, she doesn't even try to deny it. He didn't call ahead. He didn't send a message. He simply got in the elevator, descended to the parking garage, and drove across the city to the building where Vivienne kept her apartment. A sleek high-rise in a neighborhood designed to signal exactly the kind of wealth and taste that the Ashcroft name had always represented. The letter sat in his jacket pocket, pressed against his chest, and with every mile he could feel it there, the weight of it, the 2 pages that contained everything he should have known 3 years ago. The doorman recognized him and waved him through without question. The private elevator opened directly into her foyer. He pressed the button and waited, watching the numbers climb, watching his reflection in the polished brass of the doors. A man in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, holding a secret that should never have been kept from him. The doors opened. He stepped into the apartment. Vivienne appeared from the living room, and she was exactly as he had seen her that morning in the penthouse. Composed, controlled, every element of her appearance carefully curated. She wore silk loungewear in a shade of ivory that matched her couch. She held a glass of white wine in her left hand, the same way she'd held it when she told him about the dinner with the Halpins. Her expression arranged itself into surprise. Pleasant, welcoming, just the right amount of curiosity about why he had arrived unannounced. He held up the letter, said nothing, just held it, so she could see the front. Sarah's handwriting, his name, the postmark from 3 years ago. Vivienne's face didn't change. Not immediately. Her features remained in that pleasant, neutral position that she had perfected over years of charity galas and board dinners and conversations with people she privately despised. But her fingers tightened on the wineglass. Just slightly, just enough that he caught the movement, and her eyes dropped to the envelope, to the handwriting she clearly recognized, and he watched her do the math. He watched her calculate how this letter had arrived in his hands when she had specifically instructed Margot to destroy it. He watched her realize that Margot, reliable, silent, loyal Margot, had kept the box, had kept the letter, had kept everything. "Come in. Did you intercept this?" The question hung in the air between them. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but a kind of recalibration, a decision being made about how to proceed now that the secret was no longer secret. She sipped her wine, set the glass on the entry table with a small, precise click. Her hands were steady. Her posture was perfect. "I protected you." Her voice was calm, almost kind. The voice of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should have understood it already. "She was going to ruin everything we built, everything your family planned. You were finally free of her, and she was going to pull you back with my child." Silence. The word hung there. Child. And Vivienne's expression flickered for just a moment before settling back into that careful neutrality. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to explain it away. She simply absorbed the word and continued, as though a child were just another variable in an equation she had already solved. "You didn't need to know." She said it with the same certainty she used when discussing market projections or strategic alliances. "You were building something. We were building something. That woman and her situation would have dismantled everything. Your father agreed. Your mother agreed. I was the only one willing to do what needed to be done." Dominic went still. The words landed like something physical, like a blow he hadn't seen coming. "My parents knew?" Vivienne's pause was one beat too long. Her eyes moved to the window, then back to him, and when she spoke again her voice was slightly more careful. "They understood the necessity." He filed that away. It was a wound for another day. His parents, the family he had trusted, the people who had raised him and guided him and shaped him into the man he was. Had they known? Had they agreed? Had they sat across the dinner table from him for 3 years, knowing that their grandchild was out there somewhere, growing up without him? The questions multiplied in his mind, but he forced them down, one reckoning at a time. "You didn't need to know," Vivienne repeated. She stepped closer, her chin lifted, her posture unchanged. There was no guilt in her face, no regret, only the calm, absolute conviction of someone who genuinely believed she had done the right thing. "I made the call that needed to be made. Someone had to. You would have thrown everything away, the merger, the family legacy, everything your father spent his life building. For what? For a woman who couldn't even afford a proper coat, for a child you never planned." He looked at her, really looked. The way you look at someone when the image you've carried of them dissolves, and what remains is something you don't recognize. He had known Vivienne for years, had agreed to marry her, had believed, in some distant practical part of himself, that she was a reasonable choice, a sensible partner, a woman who understood the world he moved through and could navigate it beside him. But this calm certainty, this complete absence of remorse, this genuine belief that stealing 3 years of his daughter's life was simply good strategy, this was not the woman he thought he knew. This was someone else, entirely. "The engagement is over." The words came out flat, final. Not angry. Anger would have been easier, would have given her something to push back against. This was quieter, then anger. This was the sound of something ending. Dominic. The ring. Please. She stared at him for a long moment. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled at her sides. For just a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not hurt, not grief, but calculation. The rapid assessment of what this meant for her position, her plans, her future. Then her hand moved to the back of her neck, where a delicate gold chain hung beneath her collar. She had taken to wearing the ring there lately, close to her chest, a private symbol of a public commitment. She unclasped the chain, slid the ring free, and placed it in his open palm. Her fingers were cold. No tears, no raised voice, no dramatic display. "You'll regret this." She said it with the same calm certainty as everything else. Not a threat, not a tantrum, but a forecast. A prediction delivered by someone who believed she understood the future better than he did. "You'll regret this. And when you do, you'll remember that I tried to protect you from exactly this." He turned, walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Behind him, the door closed softly, deliberately. The soft click of the latch was the last thing he heard from her. In the elevator's polished steel walls, his reflection stared back at him. A man in a suit that had cost thousands of dollars. A man who ran a company that spanned 6 countries and 3 continents. A man holding a ring in one hand and a letter in the other. And the distance between those 2 objects, the engagement that was supposed to be his future and the letter that held his actual future, was 3 stolen years. 3 years of silence. 3 years of a woman and a child surviving alone. 3 years of a little girl learning to break crackers in half and organize her rabbit before sitting down, never knowing that somewhere across the city, a man with the same habits was sitting in a penthouse that had never felt like home. The elevator descended. The city rose up around him through the glass. And somewhere, 41 floors above the street, in a guest room with clean sheets and warm blankets, a woman who had waited 3 years for an answer that never came was about to learn the truth. 3 stolen years. A letter she never got to see him read. A daughter who grew up calling strangers sir instead of calling him daddy. If this story just cracked something open in your chest, share it. Send it to someone right now. Text it, post it, put it on your story. This is the kind of story that people need to hear. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. Because what happens next between Dominic and Sarah, it's the 5 words that change everything. It was late when he returned. The penthouse was dark. Not the empty darkness of a space without people, but the quiet darkness of a space where people were trying to sleep and failing. The fish tank cast its soft blue glow across the living room, and the city light pressed through the windows in that constant, restless way it always did, turning the furniture into shadows and the shadows into shapes that almost looked like company. Dominic stood in the hallway for a long moment. The letter was still in his jacket pocket, pressed against his chest where it had been for hours. The ring was in his other pocket, a circle of platinum and diamond that had represented a future he no longer wanted. He had driven back across the city in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of the engine and the weight of everything he now knew pressing down on him like something physical. He walked to Sarah's door, knocked softly, once, twice. She opened it almost immediately. She was still dressed. The borrowed clothes from 2 days ago slightly rumpled now, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. She hadn't been sleeping either. He could see it in the shadows beneath her eyes, in the tension around her mouth, in the way she stood in the doorway, like someone who had been waiting for something, without knowing what. He didn't explain, didn't promise, didn't deliver a speech, or offer an apology, or try to compress 3 years of absence into words that could never be enough. He simply walked past her into the room, sat down at the small table by the window where the city lights turned the glass into a mirror, and placed the letter between them. Sarah looked at it. Her eyes moved from his face to the envelope, to the handwriting on the front. Her handwriting, that particular slant she'd had since they were kids. And something crossed her features that he couldn't fully read. Recognition first, then confusion, her brow creasing as she tried to make sense of why he was showing her something she had written herself. And then, slowly, a dawning understanding that moved across her face like light moving across water, rearranging everything she had believed for 3 years into a new and terrible shape. You never got it. No, you didn't. Her voice caught. Her hands came up to press against her mouth, then dropped to her lap, then rose again, as though she didn't know what to do with them. All this time, you didn't. I would have come. He looked at her across the table, across the letter, across 3 years of wreckage that neither of them had built alone. His voice was steady, but something beneath it was not. Sarah, I would have come. The silence that followed was unlike any silence that had passed between them since she arrived. It wasn't cold. It wasn't guarded. It was raw. The kind of silence that happens when something shifts so fundamentally that words haven't caught up yet. Sarah's hands shook in her lap. She stared at her own handwriting, at the ink smeared by tears that had fallen years ago, in an apartment she no longer lived in a life she no longer recognized. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not forgiveness. The narrator wants to be clear about that. Not yet. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment, and they were nowhere near the end of that process. But the wall cracked, and through the crack came something fragile and terrifying and real. I used to check the mail every day. Her voice was quiet, rough at the edges, like something that hadn't been used for this purpose in a long time. For 8 months, every single day, I would walk to the mailbox and stand there, and I would tell myself that today would be the day. Today, there would be something. A letter, a message, anything. She paused, swallowed, and then one morning I stopped. And I told myself that was the day I grew up. She looked down at her hands, still trembling in her lap. But I didn't grow up. I just got smaller. I made myself small enough to fit inside a life where no one was coming. Dominic's jaw tightened. That old tension she used to release with a touch, back when touching him was something she was allowed to do, back when they were 17, and the future was something they planned together instead of something that happened to them separately. He didn't speak. He knew there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound like an excuse, and excuses weren't what she needed. She needed him to hear her, to sit in the weight of what she was saying, and not try to make it lighter. She looked at the letter again. Her fingers moved toward it, hovered above the paper, then pulled back as though touching it might break something. I wrote that on the kitchen floor of my old apartment. Her voice cracked on the word floor. Lily wasn't born yet, and I was so scared I couldn't sit in a chair. I kept sliding down to the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. I wrote the whole thing down there on the tile, with my back against the cabinet. A beat, A breath. I thought if I made it kind enough, if I didn't ask for too much, if I didn't sound angry or desperate or demanding, maybe you'd come. Maybe if I was gentle enough, you'd want to. He could barely breathe. The air in the room felt too thin, too warm, too full of everything she had carried alone for 3 years, while he attended board meetings and planned a wedding to a woman who had stolen this letter and buried it like evidence. Then the door creaked. Both of them turned. Lily stood in the doorway on bare feet, Pip trailing from one hand, his remaining ear brushing the floor. Her eyes were half closed with sleep, her hair mussed against one side of her head, her pajamas, new ones provided by Margot, slightly too big so that the sleeves covered her hands. She looked between them, with a drowsy, uncomplicated assessment of a child who has woken up and simply followed the sound of voices. Then she walked to Dominic, crossed the room without hesitation, without asking permission, without looking to her mother for approval. She climbed into his lap the same way she'd climbed into it that first night, with the complete, terrifying trust of someone who has decided you are safe. And she curled against his chest, her head settling into the hollow beneath his collarbone, Pip tucked between them. "Tall man Dominic is warm," she murmured. Asleep in seconds. The weight of her, impossible, featherlight, world-ending, pressed against his chest, and he could feel her heartbeat through his shirt, fast and light, the heartbeat of something small and alive, and entirely dependent on him not to let the world fall in. His hand came up slowly and rested on her back. He held her, carefully, like she was made of something more valuable than anything he had ever owned, than any company or contract or building with his name on it. Because she was. She was worth more than all of it, combined. Sarah watched from across the table. Her hands were still shaking. Her eyes were bright with something she wasn't letting fall. She looked at her daughter sleeping in the arms of a man who, until 5 minutes ago, she had believed knew about Lily and chose to walk away. She looked at the letter between them, at the handwriting that had carried so much hope and received nothing in return. She looked at Dominic's face, at the tension in his jaw, at the careful way he held their daughter, at the devastation he wasn't trying to hide. She didn't say, "We're fine." For the first time since she had arrived, she didn't reach for that phrase, didn't pull it around herself like armor, didn't use it to close the door on whatever she was actually feeling. She didn't say anything at all. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't a wall. It was a bridge, fragile, uncertain, built from nothing but 5 words and the truth they carried. But it was there. And sometimes that's how it starts. Not with grand gestures or perfect apologies, not with speeches or promises or dramatic declarations. Just with someone saying the thing that needed to be said, the thing that had been waiting 3 years to be heard. "I would have come," and meaning it. 23 blocks south, in an apartment that still smelled like expensive wine and the faint trace of a cologne that no longer belonged there, Vivienne Ashcroft stood at her window with her phone pressed to her ear. The city stretched out below her, all steel and glass and ambition. The same view she had looked at 1,000 times before, the same skyline that had always reminded her of everything she was building, everything she was owed. But tonight, it looked different. Tonight, it looked like a battlefield, and she was standing in the wreckage of a position she had held for 3 years, watching it crumble. The ring was gone. The engagement was over, and the man she had carefully, methodically maneuvered into her life was currently sitting in a penthouse with the woman Vivienne had spent 3 years erasing. She had underestimated Margot. That was The mistake. 20 years of loyal service. And the woman had chosen the wrong side. Had kept the box. Had kept the letter. Had handed Dominic the exact weapon he needed to dismantle everything Vivienne had constructed. But mistakes could be corrected. Battles could be lost, and wars could still be won. And Vivienne Ashcroft had not built her entire life around strategic positioning just to lose it all to a woman who couldn't afford a proper winter coat. It's time. Her voice was calm, measured. The same tone she used in board meetings. The same tone she used when delivering instructions that she expected to be followed without question. Find everything you can on Sarah Langdon. Every address, every job, every gap in the record. I want to know where she's been for the last 3 years, and I want to know what she's been hiding. She ended the call, set the phone on the windowsill with a soft click, stared out at the city with the expression of a woman who had lost a battle but had not yet lost the war. And here's what Vivienne understood that Dominic didn't. Not yet. Sarah's missing years were full of gaps. 3 years on the street are 3 years undocumented. No lease agreements with her name on them. No steady employment records. No tax filings that showed a stable income or a permanent address. There were shelters she had stayed in. Places with intake forms and caseworkers and records that could be subpoenaed. Soup kitchens where she had fed Lily. Standing in lines with other desperate mothers, accepting charity because the alternative was watching her daughter go hungry. Nights she had slept in places no mother should have to sleep. Places that would look terrible on paper, places that would raise questions in a courtroom, places that could be described in language designed to make a judge hesitate before granting custody. Inside those gaps were vulnerabilities, things that could be taken out of context, things that could be reframed, repositioned, weaponized. Vivienne didn't need the truth. The truth was irrelevant. She needed something convincing enough to make a judge pause, something sharp enough to make Dominic's family close ranks around their own interests, something ugly enough to make Sarah look like a danger rather than a mother, unstable, unpredictable, unfit. And the thing about people who have been through the worst, their survival is never clean. It's messy. It's desperate. It's full of choices that made sense in the moment, but looked different under fluorescent courtroom lighting, under the scrutiny of lawyers who are paid to find fault, under the gaze of a system that has never been kind to women who had to fight just to keep their children fed. In the wrong hands, desperation looks a lot like instability. In the wrong narrative, survival looks a lot like failure. Vivienne knew how to build narratives. She had been doing it her entire life. And somewhere in a penthouse uptown, a little girl slept against her father's chest, holding a rabbit named Pip, dreaming of a fish named Bubble, and a couch that was too clean, and a tall man who sat on the floor when she asked him to. She was dreaming the simple dreams of a child who had just begun to trust that the world might have something good in it after all, unaware that 23 blocks south, a woman in silk loungewear was already planning how to take it all away. So let me ask you, because this story isn't over, not by a long way. Who did Vivienne call? And what exactly are they going to dig up on Sarah? 3 years is a long time to survive on nothing, and survival leaves marks. It leaves records. It leaves ammunition for someone who knows how to use it. What really happened during those missing years? What did Sarah have to do to keep Lily fed? To keep a roof over their heads? to keep going when every door closed in her face. We know she ended up at the place with the red door. We know her shoes were splitting at the soles, but we don't know the full story yet. And neither does Dominic. When will Lily learn that tall man Dominic is her father? Will it be a moment of joy? The kind of moment that heals something broken? Or will someone else get there first? Will someone use that truth as a weapon before it can be given as a gift? And what about Dominic's parents? Vivienne said they understood the necessity. She said they agreed. How deep does this go? Is this just one woman's obsession? Or is this a family conspiracy that's been running for 3 years without Dominic ever knowing? And then there's Sarah. She hasn't asked for a single thing since she arrived. Not money, not help, not even an explanation. She spent 3 years building walls thick enough to survive behind, and now those walls are cracking. Can she let herself be loved again? Can she trust that this time someone will actually stay? Or will she run before trust can take root, before Lily gets too attached, before hope becomes something that can hurt her again? If you want to know what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you don't miss part 2 the moment it drops. Leave a like on this video if this story got under your skin the way it got under mine, and drop your prediction in the comments. What do you think Vivienne is planning? I want to hear your theories. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this deserve to be passed on. Until next time, this is Mr. Legacy Golden Stories, where every story leaves you with something worth carrying. Stay golden, and I'll see you in part 2.